everyone. Welcome to the Six Bridges Book Festival. My name's Eliza Bournet, and I'm the Director of Development at the Central Arkansas Library System. Realize that I have been involved with this festival since 2014 and have attended more author talks over the years than I can remember. Though today's session is notable because it marks the festival's in-person return to this wonderful theater after 2 years of virtual festivals during the pandemic. So it feels great to be able to gather with all of you in person to celebrate reading, writing, and literature. And I believe this program is being live streamed today. So for those of you tuning in virtually, welcome, and we're glad that you're here too. Before today's presentation from best-selling author Chris Pavone, I'd like to make a couple of announcements. First, big thank you to Wordsworth Books, who do such an excellent job. They do, it is a huge job managing book sales for this festival. Wordsworth also happens to be a sponsor for this session. We depend on sponsors to bring in authors like Chris, so thank you, Wordsworth, and I hope you all plan to buy lots of books from them this week. Second, in my role as Director of Development, I get to work with a lot of wonderful donors to the library system, and today I'm pleased to have the opportunity to publicly thank two of them. Doctors Jay and Paulette Mehta are both professors of internal medicine at UAMS. I first met Paulette at a reading in this theater before the pandemic, maybe the last reading I attended in the theater before the pandemic. Then she reached out to me after I started working at the library system about 1.5 years ago because she wanted to find a way to support an institution that was meaningful to her. As we've gotten to know each other, Paulette has shared how early in her career she started integrating poetry into her practice as a physician. She told me once that literature saved her from burnout, which is a sentiment that probably resonates with many of us in this room. She is passionate about bringing the community together to appreciate the arts. That passion has motivated her philanthropy, including charitable gifts, establishing literary projects at the medical school, such as an award in creative writing. Paulette also edits UAMS's journal, Medicine and Meaning, their literary journal, and founded a short story club at the Med Center, which I just found out recently is now collaborating with a short story club that is a program within CALS. So that's pretty cool. But today, I'm grateful to share that Paulette and Jay have decided to make a major gift to the CALS Foundation, the 501c3 associated with the library system. And CALS has recognized them by naming the lobby of this theater in their honor. So though CALS is generously supported by taxpayers, we also depend on support from individual donors to help fund some of our most impactful programs and projects. The Mehta's donation is funding important upgrades to this theater. So after the reading today, we'll have a reception in the lobby to celebrate the Mehta's generosity and the launch of the festival's long-awaited return to Ron Robinson. And in the lobby, you'll find information about donating to support the Six Bridges Book Festival. I hope you will join the Mehtas in making a contribution to enhance your library system, or talk to me if you'd like to specifically support the theater, which is such an important cultural hub in our community and requires regular updates and upgrades. So I hope the Mehtas will stand up and let us thank them for their generosity. Thank you again, Paulette and Jay. Now, we are so lucky to have Chris Pavone with us to kick off the festival. A former book editor, Chris is the author of 5 thrillers, including his latest page-turner, 2 Nights in Lisbon. His novels have appeared on many bestseller lists and have been translated into 24 languages. In one interview, Chris said that his goal is to write big books with big plots and big themes, and big characters who are full of everything that real people are full of, loves and hates and ambitions and fears. About this latest book, John Grisham said, "This is smart suspense at its very best." I couldn't agree with this assessment more. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Chris Pavone to Little Rock.
I was told that
live.
I might have to turn on the microphone, but it's already lit green, so it's all okay.
We've got it all figured out.
Thank you for coming.
So the first thing I want to share with you is that Chris's flight from New York was delayed like 5 times yesterday. He spent about 10 hours in the airport and had to literally sprint through ATL to make his connection and get here, which is major dedication to readers. So thanks to his delays, he isn't in Little Rock for long, but
thank you very much.
I hope we can make him feel welcome while he's here. So I'm going to kick things off with a few questions, and there are mics in the aisle, and I'll open it up pretty soon so that all of you can ask questions. There's already been a little talking in the audience, so I have a feeling we've got some Chris Pavone super fans here. So first question. All of your books have drawn inspiration from travel, which makes me think you're good at paying attention and noticing things while you're on the road. So first question, after your terrible travel day yesterday, did anything worthwhile come of it as far as interesting observations or material?
No, sadly. Yesterday was an awful bust in every way. And I don't know if all of you have been traveling much in the past, whatever, but it's just gotten so miserable. It almost makes me feel like, why bother sometimes? It's just so hard to get anywhere now. So I'm just going to sit here for the next 45 minutes and complain about Delta Airlines, if you don't mind. I'm sure that's why you came.
So thinking about happier travel, when you're planning vacations with your family, are you also scouting for your book locations?
I am. Often one of the things that I've most enjoyed about being a novelist, and this is going to sound like very irresponsible parenting, is that I, every year, take a week and go away for my children and my wife and my dog and the house and the broken boiler and everything, and just leave my entire life behind and go somewhere so far away in such a different time zone that whatever the problem is, I can't solve it. So don't even tell me about it. And it feels sort of selfish to do that, but it's also, for me, always a remarkable experience to leave my life so fully that I can completely inhabit a new life completely. And when I spend these weeks in Paris or Stockholm or Madrid or Mexico City, I'm always, during that week, just constantly living in a story that I'm creating from the minute I wake up until I go to sleep. And the value in that is immeasurable to me. That it's just so important, I think, for novelists to be able to have the space to leave everything behind and not be in the normal position of having, even if you're at a work day, we all have work days where our personal lives are constantly intruding on us. And for some jobs, that's okay. And for being a novelist, that's also okay most of the time. But sometimes you just really need to be able to focus and to live completely in a made-up story. And I didn't get to do that for Lisbon. When we went to Lisbon 5 years ago, it was on a family vacation. I didn't know I was going to set a book there. But while I was there, I thought, wow, this place is fantastic. I would love to set a book here. I just didn't have the idea for the book. And later, when I did have the idea for the book and I wrote a first draft, I was intending to go back in order to add more, in order to visit more. I wanted to have an appointment at the U.S. Embassy and talk to them about some things, but COVID. So I never did get to go back. And so this book definitely has a little less of Lisbon in it than I intended, but hopefully not so much that you would notice.
Kind of on that note, I'm curious how the pandemic has changed your writing life. I mean, obviously not being able to travel to international destinations like you were accustomed to, but how else?
I've always been very bad at working at home, and I think a lot of people during the pandemic have learned that either they're good at working at home or bad at working at home or somewhere in between. But I started trying to work at home 16 years ago, way before the pandemic, and I learned pretty quickly that I was bad at that. Like there's no dinner I won't cook, laundry I won't do, like a room I won't paint just to not write. It's so easy to get distracted from writing by, oh my God, I have a load of whites I need to do. And for me, it's always been really essential to leave home And to do it first thing in the morning, and I take a shower and I get dressed in grown-up clothes with non-elastic waistbands, and I go somewhere where I have to work. Like I'm there to work, and it's a club that I joined 16 years ago when I first started not having a full-time job, a place where I could go where I know not a lot of people, but there's always one person there who I know, and it would be humiliating if that person walked by me and saw that my computer is open to Instagram. And so it's this very specific thing of not wanting to be seen to be not working, even amongst strangers. So I couldn't go there during the pandemic, and the truth is that I was very bad at working at home, and this book took a lot longer to finish up than my previous books, and the next one took a lot longer to get started. And just a couple of weeks ago, after having been away from New York for about 4 or 5 months, I got back to my old schedule of leaving home every morning, going to this place, getting there by 8:45, and then working for 4 hours. Working for 4 hours, I know doesn't sound like that much of a hard
Tough
job.
life these writers have. Well, let's talk about 2 Nights in Lisbon. So one of my favorite descriptions of the book I've read came from an interviewer who described it as a Trojan horse, sneaking one narrative in under the pretext of a safer one. I thought that was a very smart and apt description. And I know those weren't your words, but I wondered if you could elaborate on that idea for folks who haven't read the book yet and are wanting to learn more about it. Without giving too much away, why did you choose the Trojan horse structure? What is this novel really about, in your view?
I think one of the things that we could probably all agree is not working quite correctly about America right now is that we all increasingly dwell in our silos of information and politics and facts, and we're constantly confronted with evidence to confirm the things that we already believe are true, and there's very little room in our lives to see any evidence to the contrary. And I think that's true on both sides of the political aisle, and no matter what media you consume, increasingly you're consuming something that just reinforces a worldview you already have. And I think all of us are becoming, each day that this goes on, more and more reluctant to leave our comfort zones and go looking for opinions that we don't already have. And I think that's true in fiction as much as anything. And I think you can tell by a book's marketing these days what the politics of it are. You can tell by the blurbs on the back whether this book is for your political point of view or not. And I wanted to write a book that turned that a little bit on its side. And I think that there are some subjects that some readers simply will not read about because they're against reading about it. And this book tackles one of those in what I think is an interesting way. It begins by looking a lot like a book about an American businessman who goes on a trip to Lisbon and disappears. It looks like a book about a missing man, and it's really a book about something completely different. But the thing that it's really about is probably not something that readers would want to pick up who are readers of the book about the missing guy. And so many of those are people like me or older, middle-aged male thriller readers are very particular about the types of subjects that they often want to read about. And this book is something different. That was really dancing around the truth here, but I don't want to give it away for people who haven't read
do you go
this
there
book.
in your talks, or leave it? Readers need to get the book and find out. Well, this wasn't one of my prepared questions, but just hearing that answer just makes me wonder, and I'm guessing you're someone who's probably spent a lot of time in public libraries in your life as a reader and a writer, but also on your book tours, and just thinking about disinformation and people being siloed with how they receive information. What role do you think the public library plays in broadening people's perspective and connecting them with accurate information?
That's a great question. I really don't know. I don't know how we fix this problem, and I don't. I'm not a solution to it, really. I know that. I know that fiction is not a solution to it. I don't know what the solution is, but I think part of what we need to recognize is that it's not okay to be able to lie with impunity, no matter what you're lying about in the public sphere. And I think we've accepted a certain tolerance for untruths because of what we think of as a commitment to free speech, which I find laudable, but free speech is being attacked on all sides while people continue to tell very dangerous lies about a lot of things. I don't have a solution to this. I'm not going to solve world hunger or the climate crisis either.
Well, what is your what do you hope that readers kind of take away from your book? There's certainly entertainment value, and it's hard to read about a Chris Pavone thriller without reading cliches of the breakneck pace and their page turners, and all those things are true. You can't put the books down, but there are obviously deeper levels in this book too.
First and foremost, I want the books to be enjoyable to read. It's increasingly my priority in reading is for it to be pleasurable on every page. And for some readers, that's not important. For most readers, I think maybe that's not important. But for me, as a reader, that's important. For me to enjoy reading the sentences and for me to enjoy the characters. For there to be, even in a serious book, some humor every once in a while is crucial to me. I love to laugh in books, and I find that I laugh the hardest when I laugh the least frequently. Like a book that has 1,000 jokes is not really the thing that I want. I want 3 good ones spread over 450 pages. I want it to be an enjoyable thing for people to read. I also want it to sometimes always be a hard thing to read. And I don't want it to be a struggle intellectually. I don't want it to be confusing. I want it to hurt you once in a while. I want there to be emotional moments. And I feel like I don't want to shy away from manipulating readers, trying to construct situations and characters that are going to make you hurt at some point. That's the goal. I feel like that's what I enjoy most about reading fiction, is when I believe in the characters and their story enough that when something really emotional happens, I feel it, and I want you to feel it.
It's always exciting to me when I'm reading a novel that I feel that deep connection with, and I know I have a friend who's reading it at the same time, and we can kind of text back and forth like, did you get there? And yeah, it's good when you care that much that you want to, you're even mad at the author for what they've done to your characters. What are some books and authors that have kind of hurt you, as you say, in that deep way, that you feel that connection kind of hitting on all levels?
Something I just read, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin this spring. It's a really terrific book.
That was one of those text in a friend books. There's some gasp moments in that one.
Yeah, and it's a book in which not a lot happens plot-wise, which used to be something that when I was very young, I in fact embraced books that had no plot. I went looking for them. If there was a plot, I was not interested. But then as I got older, I got more and more interested in plot as my attention span grew increasingly brief. And I now love plots, but I admire greatly books in which not a lot happens, but what does happen is really resonant, and that's one of them.
Great recommendation. So I have a few kind of craft questions, and continuing to step around what the book is really about. I will say that Ariel Price, the main character, has a lot of layers, and I'm just curious about your process for developing your characters to kind of the way the book is structured. I'm guessing you have to have it figured out before you start so that you can strategically reveal them to readers.
Yeah, I write books with complicated plots, and I had a very formative experience in the revising my first book that really made me look at the whole idea of plots and complications differently. I thought I was finished with it. I'd written this, to me, brilliant first draft of a book, and I handed it to some friends who work in book publishing, and one of them was a guy who had run one of the big famous publishing houses for decades, and we went out to lunch, and in typical publishing lunch fashion, we did not discuss what we were there to discuss until after the check came, and he paid the bill and then turned to me and said, "Chris, I like the book very much, but not enough happens." And that was it. That was all he told me. And I thought, what the hell kind of advice is this from a famous editor? That's pretty vague. And he didn't give me anything more. And I stewed about that for a couple of days, thinking, Jesus, what does that mean? And why couldn't he be more specific about what should happen? And then I realized that it's not his job to tell me what else should happen. And it's not his role to figure out what I need to add to this book. He simply thought that it should be more, that there should be more to it. And I'd written a book that had a fairly straightforward narrative with a big reveal at the end, one big twist. And I realized that I could add another twist. And then after I added that twist, I realized that I could add another. And after I'd added both of those twists, I realized that they necessitated a bunch of other action and questions that occur earlier in the book. And just the idea of looking at a book and saying, what else can happen? What else can happen? Was really eye-opening to me. And maybe it sounds completely obvious to you now as I'm saying it. It was just not obvious to me, because when I thought of the story, I thought of these characters and this sort of straight line they were going in, and then at the end, the straight line is turned on its side and you see one big twist. And that is how a lot of stories are constructed, but also it could be more if you as a writer just try to make it more. And I realized it was very, very satisfying for me to do this extra sort of 6-9 months of revisions on that first book of mine and turn it into a book that had 3 big reveals at the end and 3-4 big betrayals of characters within intimate relationships. And that to me was so much more satisfying of an experience as a writer and as a reader, and that I could simply continue to do that as for every book, and I have, and that's what I've done. But I don't know all the twists when I start. I know the one big twist, the one big reveal, or maybe a second, but it's not until I've lived in the story and come to the end that I've realized as I'm getting towards the end, I think of other things that I can add to it. And in a way, it's a very unsatisfying way to work because I'm not confident during the process that it's going to work out. But it has for 5 out of 5 books. And so I'm beginning to believe that for the 6th, I will be able to come up with twists too. But for so much of the writing process, I don't think that the book is going to be as good as I want it to be because I haven't thought of that thing, but then it happens. Thank goodness.
Do you have any methods for generating ideas for what might happen? Do you talk to other writers? Do you do kind of writing exercises or just go on a walk and see what?
Well, as mentioned, I go to Europe by myself. That's one of my main exercises. I write about my characters a lot with material that's not meant to be in the book at all. It's just writing about some character's mother or grandmother and their mom's job or dead dog or whatever, things that are not meant to be in the book, but I'm writing them so that I can fully flesh out the character and the character's motivations and concerns and fears in my mind, so that when I actually turn to putting this character on the page, I already know them so well that I can pick and choose the most important, the most germane parts to put on the page for readers. But there's so much more to them. It's just the tip of the iceberg that's on the page, but I'm the only one who will ever see the whole iceberg.
That's good advice. I'm guessing that we have some folks in the audience, certainly who love to read novels, but perhaps some who have thought that they might like to try their hand at writing novels or writing fiction someday. That's great advice right there as far as a writing exercise, but what advice would you give to someone who has never written fiction before and wants to get started? Not necessarily publishing advice, but just kind of advice for sitting down to start writing creatively.
Does anybody actually want to write a novel? Writing for publication, writing for other people is work. And if you're writing for publication, you are writing for other people. And I've never had a lot of patience listening to authors talk about writing for themselves. I think if you're writing solely for yourself, you're writing what we commonly call a diary, and that's something that you just keep to yourself. But if you're writing with the goal of having other people read it and having somebody pay you for it and having strangers part with their money and their time to read what you've written, then you're writing for them. And of course, I think every writer wants to have themselves in their books, in fiction more so than anything, I think, and it's one of the reasons why it hurts novelists so much to get bad reviews, because a bad review of a novel for a lot of writers is a bad review of yourself. It's a reviewer saying, I don't like you, I don't like your voice, I don't like this imagination of yours. And that hurts a lot in a way that I think nonfiction doesn't hurt. If you get a bad review of a cookbook, it's not really the same thing. But I feel like it's very important to focus when writing for publication on the fact that you are writing for an audience and to think about what it is the audience wants out of the type of book that you're writing. And I don't think that that's kowtowing to an audience, but I think that that's what you do when you're creating what is essentially a type of commercial product that's going to be launched into the world that people are going to be asked to buy, that it is for them in the same way that a pair of shoes is for people who are going to wear shoes, that it's I think, obviously it's different in a lot of ways, but still you're asking, as a writer, strangers to listen to what you have to say for 10 or 12 hours. And that's a big ask, and I think all writers owe it to readers to try to give them something that they want.
So speaking of cookbooks, you edited cookbooks?
I sure did.
Is that correct? Chris was an editor for a long time before starting to publish his novels, and some of you may already be familiar with his path to becoming a novelist, but I wondered if you would share that with us for those who don't know.
Definitely. Somehow when I was in college, I got the idea that I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't want to have the type of career where I was all in on being a writer, and my day job was a day job that I was just doing in order to support this other thing that was my goal one day. Because writing fiction is such a low odds endeavor. I was very afraid, I was not very confident that if I'd spent 2 or 3 decades pursuing this dream, writing advertising copy or teaching freshman English at a mediocre college, and then it didn't work out, and then I would be 45 years old with this career that didn't work out, and I couldn't think of anything worse. So I didn't want to put my eggs in that basket in that way. So instead I decided I would work in book publishing, and that if I never became a writer, I could have a really satisfying career being writer adjacent. And working in publishing was terrific. I loved it. And in the end, so much of what our careers are the people who we work with. And it's so much of every job is simply sitting in meetings with colleagues, and those colleagues are your life in a lot of ways in professional worlds. And I love the people in book publishing. I love the whole community of it. I don't love the fact that nobody makes a lot of money, but I also sort of do, because that means that nobody's in it for the money and everybody's in it because they love books. And that was a really rewarding thing to do. And I had a bunch of great experiences when I was young, and I really enjoyed being a cookbook editor too. My downfall in book publishing, though, was that I got promoted to being a person who was in charge of an imprint, a little business within a book publishing house. And all of a sudden, my job became really about hiring people and firing people and buying paper in China and terms of sale at Walmart and producing the semi-annual catalog. And all of it all of a sudden looked to me like it could be sort of widgets, and I was getting farther and farther away from the words on the page and ever closer to the cash register, and I just couldn't make myself enjoy it or be good at it. And I also realized that another way of looking at this was I was failing to become a grown-up, and I just couldn't make myself do this thing that so many people are able to do. And it helped me, or it hurt me, that my wife is a publishing executive, and she began managing people when she was very young. And by the time I'd attained this position, she had hundreds of people reporting to her. And I saw the aspects of her personality that made her good at managing people and managing a business. And I recognized that I didn't share those, that the things that made her good at this type of job were things that I did not have, and that I was probably never going to be good at that type of job. And so I realized that at this point, I was in my late 30s, I was running out of time to be a novelist, and I had sort of gotten stuck in publishing more than I intended to, and I'd allowed myself to get promoted into this thing I wasn't good at. So I quit, and I ghost wrote a couple of books, and then one day my wife came home from work and said, "What would you think of living in Luxembourg?" And at that time, I'd never lived anywhere in New York except New York and where I'd gone to college. And my little brother had lived in China in the early 1990s, and I'd never even seriously considered moving to the east side of Manhattan. And here was this fantastic opportunity to go live in Europe, and all I needed to do was say yes. And so I did.
So you mentioned the value of the people that you work with and what a huge impact that makes on all of our work. Tell us about your relationship with working with editors now and how that feels being on the other side of the process. Do you enjoy being edited?
I hate being edited, but I recognize the importance of being edited, and I feel like one of the things that I was reinforced during my years as an editor was that every single book gets almost immeasurably better through a year of editing, and none suffer from it, ever. And it's not because I was a great editor, it's because all editing by professionals, or even non-professionals, is useful. And by the time books are under contract at a publisher, they've probably gone through some work by other people than the editor. The agent often does editing, and the author normally has friends, the writer, whatever. But the focus of a real editor working on a book and focusing on how to make this not just less bad, but also better, and they're sort of two different things. The less bad part is removing the mistakes and pointing out of things that you've done wrong, and the making it better part, though, that's even more important, and that's something that I think is really benefits a lot of authors when they have good editors. Help them see, how can we make this better? How can we make these characters better, this story better? Forget removing the mistakes for a while. Let's go into this, in this moment, thinking, how can we make this story bigger and better? And I don't enjoy that process, but I respect how much better my books, all of them, have become through doing it. And it's something that I actively go seeking. And before I even send it to my editor, I always have a few rounds of early reads from people who are either current editors or ex-editors or novelists or people who are experienced in giving constructive feedback on fiction, which is not that easy of a thing to do in a constructive way, because writers are sensitive, and I'm a sensitive writer, and I don't like people telling me all the things that I've done wrong. And it takes a certain deftness to be able to communicate things that an author is doing poorly without insulting them. But I spend more than a year on every book going through these processes of having people give me feedback and working on the book to make it better.
From what I've read, revision is very important to you. Self-editing is something that you spend a lot of time on. And what can you share about the importance of revision and how you approach revision?
Oh God, I revise so much, it's exhausting. I sort of revise constantly. I begin every day by revising what I did yesterday. And it's just, I feel like Jack Kerouac famously just spit everything out onto the page and never revised anything. And when I heard that story when I was a young man, I thought, my God, what a rude thing to do. And I've always felt like my responsibility is to be the opposite of that, and to try as much as possible to have every word earn its keep. And a lot of what I do in the editing is deleting, and I go through at least one round, and normally two, with every manuscript, where my goal is to make it just arbitrarily 10% shorter. And this takes a week or two every time I do it, when I'm not looking to do anything else. I'm not looking to add anything. I'm not looking to make anything better. I am just looking to get rid of 1 out of 10 pages, to make it 10% shorter, to make every chapter 1 page shorter. And it's sort of exhausting, but it's an exercise that I feel really, really good about, because it makes me focus on looking at every sentence and saying, do you need to be here? Do you need to be here? Do you need to be here? And looking for words that I can delete. And I'm not saying that I'm a super efficient writer because of that. I think that there's probably plenty of words on my pages that you as a reader might struggle to see the point of, but I don't. I have already gone through this process and thought to myself, this needs to be here, and I know why. And maybe it's not always clear to the reader, but it is clear to me. I hope it becomes clear to the reader. But I feel like I've done this very important thing every time I go through this process of shortening my book.
So we still have about 20 minutes in our time here before Chris will be happy to sign your books. And I have more questions, but I want to make sure that y'all have time to ask your questions. So there are 2 mics here. You can stand up and ask at the mic, or we can probably hear you. We can try that if you want to ask a question from your seat. Does anyone want to ask Chris a question? I think we do need to go to the microphones, probably so the folks who are watching at home can hear us. So Kathy, if you don't mind asking at the mic.
Okay. I just finished the book last night, loved it. I have a question which I think would not be a spoiler about this particular book. I wondered if you were talking about how you might go back and add these twists, or at least you did initially. I wondered if the section about the goat, which I must admit I kind of skimmed over, did that get added so that things wound up better, or did you have that in your head from the beginning?
That's a good question. So I've been talking about this book now for nearly a year, maybe 9 months or so. It was published in May, but before that, I had a bunch of pre-publication events, and I've probably spoken in public about this book somewhere like 50 times, and nobody has ever asked about the goat before. My editor didn't ask about the goat. No one has ever brought up the goat. There's a goat in this book named Fletcher. I don't remember why I named the goat Fletcher. And it is true that I added the goat after I finished writing the whole thing in order to construct a conversation, in order to construct this dynamic that would not become evident what its relevance is until you get to the very end of this book. So this is one of those things where I think I'm very, very glad that you noticed the goat. A lot of people might not notice the goat or remember the conversation, but it's part of what I do in constructing these books is after I've come to the end and added the twist and then the other twist and the other twist, I go back and I add other things to justify these twists and to make the twists into things that you as a reader, when you get to them, you don't say to yourself, oh, give me a goddamn break. I hate when that happens. I, as a reader, can't stand when the twists come so much out of the blue that you feel cheated. I don't want you to feel cheated. I want it to feel earned. And the goat is part of earning one of the twists in this book.
What intrigued you about Lisbon And do you believe in the idea that sense of place or the locale can be a character within the book itself?
When we went to Lisbon about 5 years ago, before I go anywhere, I tend to ask my friends, anybody I come across, I'm going to Lisbon, I'm going to Portugal in a couple of months. Do you have any recommendations? Any hotels, any restaurants, any things we need to do? And I always get some suggestions, and they're always useful. For Portugal, for Lisbon, I was very surprised that almost everybody I asked had been to Portugal sometime in the previous year or two. And for so many people, it was a similar experience as mine, which is that we've gone 5 decades of our lives without going to Portugal. And then all of a sudden, everybody I knew was going to Portugal. And to me, there was something compelling about that. There's something about Portugal all of a sudden that made people in my social circle want to go there. And when I got there, I could see a lot of the reasons why. It's a really, really beautiful place and friendly and easy to navigate and very inexpensive in the overall context of European travel. And I just had a great time. It's also the shortest flight to Europe from America, which is also its own sort of compelling. And we went to this great hotel, which it wasn't free, but I think it was like $250 a night. And it was a confusing booking situation, and I didn't quite know what I was getting. And I was a little bit worried that it was not going to be all that great, because $250 a night in some cities gets you a really, really horrible hotel. But in Lisbon, this got me a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment with multiple balconies and a kitchen and a dining room, and it was just spectacular. And I was walking around thinking, Jesus, have they put us in the wrong room? And this was a room that in Rome or Paris would cost $2,000 a night. And the first morning we woke up there's this sun flooding in these giant windows that overlook this really, really beautiful square right across the street. And I thought, my God, it's so perfect here. Something horrible should happen. And I'm not the type of person who goes looking for that type of thing, but that as a setup to stories really, I find compelling. That the placidity and perfection of something that as a reader, as a viewer of a movie or television show, this is the first thing you see is something that looks so perfect, and then you find out that it's anything but. I think, to me, that's a very compelling setup. And at the time, I didn't have an idea of what the story should be, but I knew I wanted to have a story that's set in Lisbon, and I knew I wanted it to open in that hotel room that I stayed in, and it does. That's exactly where this book opens. I feel like the character as the place as character question is something that I think a lot of novelists tackle or wonder about, and some people write books where there's no way for you as a reader to know where this is taking place, and that's sort of the point. For other types of novels, people like me, novelists, really do want the place to be a big part of it, and I feel like both decisions are right, depending on what it is that you're trying to do. What I'm trying to do in all of my books is to provide you as readers with the adventure of going someplace. And for this book, for Lisbon, I wanted that someplace to be interesting and intriguing in the way that everything is intriguing, which is sort of vaguely, that you know there's something compelling about it, but not exactly what. And that was the way I felt about Lisbon before I went there, and that's what I wanted to communicate in this book too.
I'll be in Lisbon in 2 weeks, and if something terrible happens, we hold you responsible.
Thank you.
I took my wife and 2 toddlers, and we were expats for 3 years. And thinking about all the chaos and everything that went with that, how on earth did you, in your first book, turn that experience of not being a James Bond expat, but a dad and a husband, and turn that into a thriller? Can you riff on that just a little bit?
We moved abroad when I was 40 years old, and our twins were 4. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have a job. I didn't have a career anymore. When people asked me what it was that I did, I said, I'm home with the kids, which was not a terribly comfortable thing to say, especially in Luxembourg, where we were living. It was a community of expats that's almost entirely worked in finance, and almost all the families we knew looked very, very similar. They were from America or Northern Europe, and the husbands were bankers or lawyers, and they had all come to Luxembourg to make more money and pay less taxes, and their wives had given up their jobs or their careers to come support that dream. And so every household looked very similar. It was guys wearing suits going to offices, and it was women in playgrounds with little kids. And I did not love being the only man in this situation, and I did not love almost anything about this experience. It was very eye-opening to me how hard it was to not just be a full-time parent, but to have given up so many parts of my identity that I had before I gave them up. And I realized that it's a difficult way to move through the world, being somebody whose main occupation is tending to little children and doing the cooking and the cleaning and the supporting of a spouse in the thing that they do professionally that earns money. And I wanted to write about that. And that's the book that I started writing when I first typed expats at the top of a blank page, was largely a book about that. After working on that book for a few months, I realized that I was writing a very, very boring and whiny book. And I didn't want to go out into the world and do that. That's not who I wanted to be. But I wanted to write about this predicament of this heightened version of leaving the workforce to be home with little kids is really, really exaggerated by doing it abroad as well. When you're taken out of an environment where you know how to do everything. You people who live here, me in New York City, you know how to do everything that you need. You know how to get your car inspected. You know how to take out the garbage. You know when you need to go to the doctor and what for. You know how to get insurance. You know how to pay your bills. And it's astounding how different those things can be in a different country, where I didn't know how to do any of those things I just described. I did not know how to take out my garbage, and it took me a month to figure it out. Imagine that. Having no idea how to actually get rid of your household trash. We had a spare bedroom in our apartment that I thought of for a while as the garbage room, because that's where I was keeping what I thought of as the fresh garbage. And I took a couple of months writing this book before I realized that it was not good. And I stopped writing, tried to think about how can I turn this into something that would be good. And it occurred to me at a playground. I went to a playground almost every day, and as everybody who's from Scandinavia reminded me all the time when it was raining or snowing, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. And so we got all our rain gear, and I went to the playground even if it was raining, and sat there on a bench making small talk with the strangers and watching my kids and trying to prevent them from falling off of tall, dangerous climbing apparatuses and breaking their bones, which they did anyway, even with me watching, because of course watching doesn't prevent it from happening. It just gets you to the hospital faster. And for the most part, the people I was talking to in the playgrounds were friendly and very forthcoming. And part of being an expat is the willingness to be friendly and forthcoming to strangers. If you've moved abroad and are going to playgrounds with little kids, and you're not willing to talk to strangers, you're going to be miserable. One woman, though, gave me nothing. When I asked her where they'd lived before, she said, literally, "Oh, we've gotten around." And I thought to myself, what the hell kind of answer is that? What are you trying to hide from me? And it sort of became a little game for 5 minutes of me asking questions and her refusing to give me solid answers. And I couldn't help but think briefly that she was the most inept spy ever. And then it occurred to me that no, maybe she's not the inept spy. Maybe her husband is a spy, and she's the inept spouse of a spy. And that amused me for a few seconds. But then it occurred to me also that Luxembourg It's one of the private banking capitals of the world. It's one of the 3 capitals of the European Union. Everybody is there for high finance and tax evasion and international diplomacy. And surely there are spies. This is what spies are for. And that I regularly went to the embassy and hung out with people who worked at the embassy. And of course, I knew spies. I just didn't know who they were. And that's when I realized that that's what I could do with this boring book I was writing. I could add spies.
I'm interested in whether you would, when you subsequently visit places that you've used as characters in your book, how do the local audiences react to that? Particularly, I guess, Lisbon or anywhere else, Luxembourg or Paris. What is there a sense of betrayal associated with the way they see your characterization of that place?
No, I had a hard time selling. I wrote a book that took place entirely in Paris, and nobody in Paris wanted to publish it because they were all offended that an American would write about Paris. So I thought, you know what, fair enough. Luxembourg, I did not treat Luxembourg super well in the expats. I don't think it comes off as a place where you definitely want to move to. And I definitely got the sense when I went back on book tour to Luxembourg that some of the expats I'd left behind resented me for not glorifying this place, which I didn't take out into the gutter and beat with a stick. Like, I don't feel like Luxembourg sounds like a horrible place to live, but people tend to look very, very closely at things that are closest to them. And this is, I think, a common suffering that all novelists go through is everybody who you know thinks that the book is about them. And I wish that I could just say blanketly to everybody, it's not about you. But we do get our ideas, novelists, from the lives around us. And so everything needs to come from somewhere. And sometimes there are bits and pieces of the real world characters who sneak in. And obviously there's the whole of the locations that are in there. When I went to Luxembourg on book tour, the only thing that disconcerted me was a couple of weeks before I was due to arrive, I got a phone call, which I don't get that many phone calls from people I don't know that I am willing to take. And this was a phone call from Luxembourg, and it was the ambassador. And it wasn't the ambassador, it was the ambassador's office saying, we see that you're going to be in Luxembourg. The ambassador requests the pleasure of a meeting while you're here. And I felt like I'd been called to the principal's office because, among other things, there's an ambassador in the expats who is a nincompoop, but very, very purposefully a nincompoop. And this ambassador in my book was sort of based on the person who'd been the ambassador when I lived there. But the new ambassador was the one summoning me, and I went to the principal's office very scared that I was going to get yelled at. But it was not that at all. It was a fine meeting that was witnessed by somebody who had to take notes to make sure that it's just apparently what goes on with ambassadors. But it was a very nice meeting.
It's so interesting how you have so much courage to go abroad and enter into these different cultures. I'm wondering how much you trained in the local language, because language has such an impact on how we think and feel and express ourselves. Did you study the languages of the places you went to? And how did you really get into the meaning and nuance of the things people were saying?
That's a good question. When we moved to Luxembourg, I spoke a little bit of French, and I took some pretty intensive classes right before we moved, and then while I was there, I took classes too. There's a lot of French in Luxembourg, and I spoke French as part of my daily existence. I did learn, however, in Luxembourg that French is only part of the equation, and that there are some people in Luxembourg who speak German, and there are other people in Luxembourg who speak Luxembourgish. and Luxembourgish is impenetrable. Luxembourgish is a German-Flemish dialect that there's no way to learn. There's no such thing as a Berlitz class in Luxembourgish. It's a language that Luxembourgers reasserted as a real language after World War II. They've been primarily a German-speaking country, but Germany treated Germany treated lots of people horribly during the Second World War, and Luxembourg really came out of it resenting it and stopped speaking German and restarted speaking Luxembourgish, which is also what kids learn in Luxembourgish elementary school, thus keeping all foreigners really out of public school in Luxembourg, because nobody really wants their kids to learn Luxembourgish. If you're going to learn a foreign language, which is not an easy thing to do, and you're not planning on living in Luxembourg, you really don't want that language to be Luxembourgish. So unfortunately, people like tradesmen, plumbers, mechanics, those people in Luxembourg speak Luxembourgish, and that was part of my job there. My wife went to an office where business was conducted in English, but I was the one going to the garage and begging the Luxembourgish guy to not speak Luxembourgish with me because I couldn't understand it, but instead speak French, where he would then I'm from New York City, and we don't in New York City drive on a daily basis. I'd never driven a car on a daily basis until we lived in Luxembourg, and I'll be very honest with you, I was extremely bad at it, and I kept crashing my car into stationary objects, and I kept needing to get the car repaired, and I would go to the same garagiste all the time, this guy who primarily spoke Luxembourgish, and every time I went to him, the first thing we needed to do was he needed to tell me for 10 to 15 minutes how everything in Luxembourg was better than everything in the United States, and I would just have to agree with him, oui monsieur, and can we move on please, and get to how much is it going to cost me to replace the windshield that I just broke. I've gotten confused. What was the question? Oh, it was about language. I did not attempt to learn any Portuguese, really, nor did my main character, Ariel, and that's part of the plot.
Also, tell us a little bit about your marketing success. I saw on Amazon you have thousands of 5-star reviews. That's really very impressive.
Thank you. My role is really to write the books, and one of the things that I respect about book publishing is the jobs that everybody does, and marketing and publicity and sales and design are all things that are not my area of expertise, and I don't want them to be. And I am very glad that I have very, very professional, hardworking publishers who do things like market the book on Amazon and get all those starred reviews and Goodreads, etc. I do what I'm told, but that's not where my passion lies. I like writing the books, and I like coming to things like this and talking to people like you about them, but I don't involve myself in all corners of the business, because as established, I'm a bad business person.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, this time flies, but it is past 1 o'clock. So thank you, Chris, for coming to Little Rock, especially given your heroic efforts to make it here. Thanks again to Wordsworth for their sponsorship. Wordsworth is just outside. If you need to buy a copy of Chris's book, I hope you'll go buy it. And I recommend you do, because it's great. And he will be sitting right here and signing, so we'll kind of line up in the aisle, and you can get your book signed and continue visiting with him. Thank you again to Jay and Paulette for your generosity to the library system, and I hope we can also keep visiting in the lobby right now. So enjoy the festival. We got a whole week of jam-packed activities, so hope I'll see some of you at more events. Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming.